Well, the two most abused words in the English language, perhaps in every language, the two most abused words are the words God, God's holy name, and love. Those two words seem to be come to the forefront whenever we have to express our anger, or what does love express? How abused is the word love? Because what does it mean? Well, it can mean lots of different things to a lot of different people. And we're actually born without love. Hopefully we're born into love. That is to say, those who bring us into the world, hopefully they love us. We're born into love. But when we are born, we cannot love at all. So we are born without it. It's something we have to acquire. It's something we have to learn. What is love? What is love? What does it do? What is real love in the sense that God is love, as St. John the Apostle says in his epistle? What is love in that sense? Well, we're told that love is the amor benevolentiae, which is the love of well-wishing. We're told by the church that love is actually willing the good of another person. That's what love is. It's willing the good of another person. In other words, you have such a regard for another person that you want them to have what is good. And even to the point where if you love them enough, you want to give them of your own good. You want to share your goods and your goodness with them, even to sacrifice them, even to sacrifice your own goods for them. That's genuine love, love as we measured in sacrifice in that regard, that it's something that you give. It's something that you give. Now, when we talk about the duties that come to you through the marriage bond, you realize that it's all giving, and that requires love. It requires love on the part of those who are married. It requires a very special love. And you have many so-called relationships. You love your parents, you love your children, you love your brothers and sisters, your siblings, you love your friends. As our Lord demands, we even love our enemies. Yeah, we actually will the good of our enemies. We want them to save their souls. We will not the death of the sinner, but that he be converted and live. And that's love. But when a man loves a woman, and a woman loves a man enough to marry them, they have to love each other on all levels. They have to love each other in every way. They have to love each other on the level of the soul, spiritually. They have to love each other on the level of the intellect, their minds. They have to love each other on the level of, the emotional level too. They have to have this emotional bond between them. They have to love each other physically and be attracted to each other, ideally. And so when a man marries a woman, or a woman a man, they have to love each other in that unique way that a man loves a woman who will be his wife, and a woman loves a man who will be her husband. And because that love has to be so unique, it is necessarily exclusive. That a man, when he loves a woman that much to marry her, and a woman loves a man enough to marry him, the two of them have to love the other person on every level. And that unique kind of love necessary for a man to love a woman that she be his wife, and a woman to love a man to be her husband, that is such a complete love, and such a unique love, that it forges through marriage that bond between them, that outwardly represents what is interiorly present, that is a real, genuine, deep love, a complete love for each other. Now, when a man marries a woman, he needs to know something about her. He needs to know that she's capable of love. It's something we learn, and he needs to know that when she says, "I love you," that she understands the meaning of that. He needs to understand that she means what he means when he says to her, "I love you." that they both understand what love really is. And these days, it's very hard to tell if people have actually learned what love really means. When a man marries a woman, he needs to know that she loves him second best in the whole world. And when a woman marries a man, she needs to know that he loves her second best in the whole world. They need to know that. They need to have that confidence. And they are called upon to share. As I mentioned, that is the consequence, the immediate practical consequence of the marriage bond. They're called upon to share three things. They're called upon to share their lifetimes. That's the first thing. They're called to share their lifetime. Secondly, they're called upon to share the goods of marriage, or the property that they own. And thirdly, they're called upon to share the marriage bed. It's easy to see why. They're called upon to share their lifetime because essentially our lives are, in a sense, quote unquote, made of time. And time is a so-called fungible good that we spend it. We spend money, we spend all kinds of things, we spend time also. And we don't like to waste these fungible goods. We don't like to waste money. We don't like to waste food, and we don't like to waste time. These are goods that get used up or spent in the very process of using them. And so it is with our lives. And we see that a man and a woman, in getting married, they have an obligation to spend their time with each other. Now, that doesn't mean that they are meant to be together 24 hours and 7 days a week. That would drive them crazy. But it means that that is their default mode, in the sense that what is natural to them and what is most desirable for them is to be together. That everything else they do in life is directed toward that purpose of actually being together, and they should want to be together. When a man and a woman who are married don't want to be together, you've got a problem. When they avoid being together, you've got a problem. They should want to be together and to spend that time together that is required by the marriage vow. That should be the most natural place, and that's when they're most at rest, when they are together, and most content. And the same with the goods of marriage. Now, when people get married, they have to share these things. But that doesn't mean that they've made a vow of poverty. That doesn't mean they can't own anything anymore. Of course, the husband still has his property, and the wife still has her property. His golf clubs are still his, and the shoes in her closet are still hers, and they can't go selling these things off to. The husband can't say, I need new golf clubs, and go have a yard sale with the things from his wife's closet. Just try that, selling off her shoes. And so he can buy himself a pair of new golf clubs. Or the wife can't go into the husband's, closet, drag out his golf clubs, and say, I'm going to sell these because I need a pair of new shoes. No, there are things that are his and things that are hers. Even to the point where if one of them has a great-great-uncle Ebenezer, somebody who dies and leaves them $100 million, it's their inheritance individually. So a husband and wife do not give up the right to own and use private property when they get married. The point is that the goods of marriage that are necessary for the whole family, the family as such, as a unit, those goods must be dedicated to the family. And so what everyone needs, the home, the cars, everything, things that people all depend on, these are the things in a family that should be held by the husband and wife together. So they should hold their property in common. In fact, they more or less have to have the sense of a religious sister or brother who enters religious life and makes the simple vow of poverty, not that they're vowing to be poor, but they have the idea, okay, I own these things, but I do place them at the disposal of the good of my family as a whole. And the third thing, of course, that they have to share is the marriage bed. And obviously they have to share that because it's the only way they're going to conceive children. So they have to indulge in the intimacies that they gave each other the strict right to, when they made their marriage vows. Remember, I mentioned that they exchange rights, and those rights that they give and receive at the same time from the other person. Those are the very rights that involve their power of conceiving children, of bringing children into the world. They're giving those rights over themselves to the other person. That's why this is such a very powerful and such a unique bond and such a special contract, because it involves the very person and rights over the very person of the husband and the person of the wife that they're giving to each other for the sake of, yes, the intimacies necessary to bring life into the world. As I mentioned, whether they actually bring life into the world is God's decision. But the fact that they're getting married with the intention of being there to do God's will, that is the thing that is most pleasing. And that is what brings a blessing, God's blessing on them, and especially in terms of everlasting life. God will reward them for their patient openness to the will of God in all things. So you see, to share these things, there has to be a real love there. If there is not a genuine love there, and these people are obliged to spend their time and their goods and even the intimacies of the marriage bed together, then it will simply be seen as an intolerable burden and awaken nothing but resentment. So they need to be drawn together and held together by love. But I mentioned that the husband and wife need to have the confidence that the other person loves them second best. And by that, I don't mean to say that they have to love themselves best of all. Not at all. That's not the point. When you have a man marry a woman, he has to have a certain confidence in her ability to love, that she knows what love is, and she has to have a confidence in him, that he knows what love is. So she needs to know that he loves her second best, but that he loves God most of all. She really needs to know that, have a confidence. I'm marrying a man who loves God most, who loves God more than he loves me even. That's what I need. I need to know that. And a man, when he marries a woman, it's important to him to know that he's marrying a woman who loves him, but loves God more, and loves God most of all. I have to have that confidence. I mean, take a woman who marries a man who has the idea, he loves me more than anything, including God. He loves me more than God himself. Now, a woman might think, oh, this is very flattering. This is what I want. But then she realizes there are, again, consequences to that, because she may actually pride herself in thinking, well, I can get what I want. I can get what I want out of my husband. All I have to do is put up pressure and bully him. And, he'll do, I can wrap him around my little finger and make him do what I want. Well, a woman who's looking for a man like that is not looking for a man. And eventually she's going to discover something. She's going to discover that if she can manipulate him in that way, by flattery, by pressure, by threats, whatever it is she uses to manipulate him, she's going to have to come to the realization, well, if I can do this, and I can manipulate him like this, who else can do it? Who else can bring that kind of pressure on him? Who else can influence him that way? If I can, his boss, maybe another woman, who knows? She's got to realize that's not a good thing, that her husband loves her most of all, in the sense that he loves her even more than he loves God. A woman needs to know that her husband actually loves God enough that he can say no to her, and he will say no to her when he believes it's a matter of principle and a matter of conscience, when it's a matter of faith, when it's a matter of being faithful to God. He has the backbone necessary to stand up and say, honey, as much as I love you, I believe that this is the right thing to do. I believe it that in conscience before Almighty God, this is what I have to do. And if there were any other way, believe me, I would be very happy to give you what you want here, but I can't, because it is a matter of conscience. He has to be able to do that, and she has to be able to know that he's able to do that. And she'll respect him for that, too. If it's a matter of selfishness, no, she won't respect that. If it's a matter of devotion and love for God if he takes a stand on that and he shows her by the way he behaves himself that that's true, that he's not just saying that he really means it, she'll respect him for that and love him all the more for it. But a man needs a woman, too, who will love God most and love him next. And eventually what happens, the two loves actually grow together so that the love for her husband and the love for God are joined together. And the love for his wife and for God are joined together. They are sort of united and fused together. They become, as it were, one love, because in loving her, he loves God. In loving him, she loves God. And she's being faithful to him, and being faithful to him and being faithful to her means being faithful to God. And that's how, when they're married, truly those loves grow together and so intertwine that they're almost indistinguishable. Ultimately, you want a man to love a woman enough to marry her because he loves God, because he sees things in her that are beautiful, and they're beautiful because they represent God, virtues in her soul, her goodness, and so on. All of these things, in a sense, represent qualities and beauty that originate in God himself. You want the husband and wife to love each other that way. And so that love is very important. But unfortunately, in our own day and age, the name of God is often abused, and the word love is often abused. And people use these words with no respect and with even no concept of how important these are. We do have the worldly view, kind of a worldly view of marriage. In fact, there are some interesting quotes from worldlings about marriage that some of them actually have some truth to them. For example, Socrates is quoted as saying, Socrates, the great philosopher, said, "By all means marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher." Well, he became a philosopher, so I guess that tells you something right there. But it takes a little bit of thought to figure that out. Anybody know who Red Skelton is? Okay. Anybody not know who Red Skelton is? Okay, thank you. Supposedly, he said, all men make mistakes, but married men find out about them sooner. Ambrose Bierce is quoted as saying, love is a temporary insanity cured by marriage. Okay. Anybody not know who Groucho Marx is? Really? Groucho Marx is supposedly said, marriage is a wonderful institution, but who wants to live in an institution? The poet Ogden Nash wrote, to keep your marriage brimming with love in the loving cup. Whenever you're wrong, admit it. Whenever you're right, shut up. Okay. Supposedly Winston Churchill said, my most brilliant achievement was my ability to be able to persuade my wife to marry me. I could see that with Winston Churchill, right? He's the one who was told by Lady Astor, I think, once, if you were my husband, I'd poison you. He answered, well, if I were your husband, I'd drink it. James Dobson, you know who James Dobson is? He's quoted as saying, don't marry the person you think you can live with. Marry only the individual you think you can't live without. Okay? Then you go to the other extreme, Benjamin Franklin, okay? He was not a very devout Christian, supposedly, not. But these words are attributed to him. Keep your eyes wide open before marriage, half shut afterwards. So, and Nancy Astor said, I married beneath me, all women do. The great Catholic poet of the 1600s, Alexander Pope, wrote, they dream in courtship, but in wedlock, they wake up. Minion McLaughlin wrote, a successful marriage requires falling in love many times, always with the same person. Okay? And Homer, the great poet of old, long old, there is nothing nobler or more admirable than when two people who see eye to eye keep house as man and wife, confounding their enemies and delighting their friends. Kind of a nice sentiment from somebody who lived many centuries ago. Closer to home, Abraham Lincoln said, marriage is neither heaven nor hell, it is simply purgatory. So I think that's kind of revealing a little bit when these people make such statements. Irma Bombeck, the kind of advice columnist, wrote, marriage has no guarantees. If you're looking for a guarantee, then go live with a car battery. Gilbert Cheston, you all know who Gilbert Cheston was, right? Everybody knows that. Wrote, marriage is an adventure, like going to war. And an interesting statement by a man named Gerald Brennan. In a happy marriage, it is the wife who provides the climate, the husband, the landscape. Interesting, hadn't thought of it that way before. And Robert Louis Stevenson, again, kind of echoing Chesterton, marriage is like life. In this, that is a field of battle and not a bed of roses. So in all of these things, these people are kind of conveying their certain aspects of marriage, no doubt, revealing something about their own experience or what they observe in others. Supposedly Ruth Bell Graham said, a happy marriage is the union of two good forgivers. And that is true. People have to get very good at forgiving in order to be happily married, because it is kind of a life of forgiving. And so I thought their input is not entirely worthless. Actually, the experience of natural marriage, draws comment, but it's good for us to realize and bear in mind that marriage is one of those things that draws so much attention and is so much front and center to human life that it is probably the most commented about experience and probably the most joked about experience. I mean, how many of the jokes that are told revolve around marriage and married life? And how many shows, television shows and all the rest that have come in, some maybe good, some maybe not so good, but how many of them revolve around married life, getting married, being married, and married life situations? So many of the things that we cook up for our and entertainment involve marriage and married life. So it's so central, understandably so, though, because, again, its origins are right at the very heart and soul of the existence of the human race, right? And God's creation of us. It's right there. So what is very much a concern for us, you see, is that we, as, well, in this case, men, have hearts and souls that are, you might say, are geared for marriage. You know, when you list the sacraments, you come to the end of the list of sacraments, and the last one listed is extreme unction. Well, that means you're ready to go and face God with whatever you've done with your life, okay? But the two sacraments before that are the two sacraments of states of life, the married state and the consecrated state, the priesthood, holy orders. Those are number 5 and number 6 in every list of the sacraments, and they precede only extreme unction in the list. So people might have the idea, that if you have a vocation to the priesthood, that you have a different concept and a different set of values or whatever than a man who is called to the married state. That you don't think like a man called to the married state. you think like a priest, and the priest and the married man, the priest, one who is called to the priesthood and one who is called to the married state, are two very different people. But that's not true. That they must have a great deal in common, including the man called to the single state too, because there are those who are definitely called to the single state by God because they are needed. They are needed to be single because they are needed to be free and unencumbered by their own personal serious obligations that keep them totally occupied. They are there to be like the light cavalry that can help the others fulfill their mission too. So that's actually a vocation unto itself. But all of them have to have a man's heart. All of them have to have a man's mind. And all of them have to love as a man loves. I talked about how when a man hears from the woman he's intending to marry that she loves him, or when he says to her, I love you, that each of them needs to understand and be convinced that the other one knows what the word means, and that they have a common understanding of the meaning of love. If they're talking about two different things, they're in trouble. Just as if they walk down the aisle of the church, and they pronounce the marriage vows, and they don't mean the same thing when they say those words, they're in trouble. It might even be an invalid marriage if they don't mean the same thing when they pronounce the marriage vows. And so when they say, I love you, they had better mean pretty much the same thing. But there's always this difference that a man loves as a man loves and a woman loves as a woman loves. And a man wants a woman to love as a woman loves, and a woman wants a man to love her as a man loves. That's what she's looking for. The loves of a man and a woman are essentially the same, but not identical. And they each bring something special. In fact, Stanford Medical just published the results of a massive study, hundreds of brains, male and female brains. And they actually developed a kind of, artificial intelligence, curiously enough, to examine the brains of men and women, like brain scans. And they developed this, I guess, software, and together with this scanning machinery, and they actually put brain scans of the male brain and the woman brain, hundreds of these scans, and identified this is a male brain, this is a female brain. And when they did that with enough examples of the male brain and the female brain, then what they would do is they would take brain scans of a male and a female and feed them in and let the machine kind of examine them. And then they would challenge the artificial intelligence machine to identify whether it was a man or a woman, a male or a female. Now, the reason they did that was they figured they could let the machine scan the male and female brains, knowing which they were, and artificial intelligence would then be able to identify the characteristics of the male and the female brain. So that if afterwards, then they could put in the scan of either one, the machine could actually detect the actual physiological, anatomical, chemical, so on, differences. And what they found was, yes, there were all of those differences. Those differences are that way. The structures of the brain and the way they function, even the chemical function of some of the elements of the brain differ between men and women. They found that their program, whatever it was, actually was something like 99.9% accurate in identifying just from the brain scan whether it was a male or a female. And the reason they did this was to kind of demonstrate the fact, or at least to find some kind of objective means of determining, there is a physiological difference between the male brain and the female brain. Now, you know that, and I know that, but they had to prove it to themselves because they're scientists. They have to prove the obvious, So there has to be a way of accounting for the different thinking and the different even different reactions to things, the different operations of the brains manifested in the different behavior of men and women. But now there's a great deal of effort made to try to bury all of this. But the more they study this, the more they realize, the more they actually prove to themselves that, yeah, the brains of men and women are very different things. Not to the point where they're two different species, but still it's awful close, because they function so differently. And when you marry a wife, you realize, and you realize in no short order. If you didn't realize it before you get married, you certainly realize it soon afterwards. She doesn't think the same way I do. She doesn't process the information the same way I do. She doesn't come to the same conclusion. She doesn't see it the same way I do. She doesn't react the same way I do. She's got a very different way of looking at things. And this can be very charming. It can also be infuriating. But it's a fact that men and women have to deal with because of love. There is something that draws them together, as God designed them to be, to draw each other. But also they have to be able to love each other enough to work and to benefit from each other's point of view, rather than to benefit from each other's point of view and see the good in it and see the value of it and realize that with these two points of views, the male and the female, maybe their understanding is more complete than just with one or the other. So instead of fighting each other, they're actually supplementing and even complementing each other. The natural tendency is to resist and fight, but love enables them to overcome that natural tendency to be able to see things differently, to actually gives the benefit to the other that there's some value to what they see, and I need to understand it and see what good there is there, and maybe I will have a better understanding because of that, a more complete understanding, rather than the one-eyed man or the one-eyed woman. Now I've got two eyes here. So in any case, when we approach marriage like this, it's very important to know that there is genuine love and that there is a genuine well-wishing, that the man and the woman really love each other in the way they express their desire for the good of the other person. And they love each other enough to be willing to sacrifice of their own comfort, ego, and so on, for the benefit of the other. Now, there are things that are very much the friend of love, and there are things that are very much the enemy of this love. And one of the great enemies of true love is fantasy. You know, when we read the stories about the knight in shining armor going and rescuing the fair damsel, we read about these fairy tales. We read about fairy tales, and the fairy tales can be very, very impressive and influential, especially for a woman, I think. Women tend to get caught up in that. They want the fairy tale marriage. They want the fairy tale wedding. They want everything to be very much like a storybook. And as they prepare for their wedding, it's so important that everything be just right. The dress has to be just right. The music everything has to be, the church has to be decorated just right. The flowers, all of these details, it has to be sort of like a fantasy out of some Arabian Nights tale or some great story of rags to riches, and the princess then, marries the pauper, or the prince marries the girl raised in poverty, and suddenly everything is just so romantic. And this is the thing, it's so romantic. That's what a woman can be taken in by, and think that romance is perpetually there, that that the whole marriage, not just the day of the marriage, the wedding, but the whole marriage will be one long romantic adventure. This is the kind of idea that is sold to the women these days, and they are more than happy to buy it up. They love this, and they live happily ever after. They lived happily ever after. But the stories that end with the expression, and they lived happily ever after, begin with the once upon a time, long, long ago, in a land far, far away. That's how the story begins, okay? So it's very remote. It's not necessarily her life. But she puts herself into this. And this is kind of this fantasy, fairy tale, romance stuff that is sold to the women. The soap operas and all the rest, all the emotional stuff and all that. And that's very dangerous. And it's very dangerous because if a woman marries expecting that life, she's going to be very disappointed. Now, you know, many of you, I suppose, have had young girls, daughters of your own, have sisters of your own who got married. And you know, they can kind of get swept up in the romance of it all. Everything else in life is boring. The only thing they've got in their mind is their romance. They're kind of living the fairy tale. And you might even be concerned so much that when the page turns in the fairy tale book, they're going to find out that it's not all just lovey-dovey romance stuff. And the honeymoon comes to an end, and they have to get down to actually being married. And that's hard work. That's hard work. You don't want them to feel as though they've been swindled, they've been deceived, trapped. You don't want them to feel that way. That would be very bad. A lot of women do, though, unfortunately, when they go into it with that fairy type expectation. And so, as a father, you know, you want to have a very fatherly talk and explain things, and you don't want to dash the romance and so on of it all, but you do want a certain realism to make them understand that there's the other side of it too, and that's no less romantic when it's a matter of love, and they're giving out of love because love loves to give. But there's something about it for men too. You see, there's not just the romantic fairy tale aspect of marriage. For men, there's something else. And it's something actually far more deadly. Because men bring to marriage certain expectations. And the intimacies with this girl they love are very important to a man. They're very important incentive for a man to marry. In fact, that's a very important part of a man's love for his wife-to-be. And that is that he finds her very physically attractive and finds a great deal of gratification from being intimate with her. God put that there. It's not bad. It's not wrong in itself. God put that in men for the sake of drawing them together as an incentive to marry, but also as a reward for being married and doing the things that marriage requires, to being faithful in marriage. God rewards that by the pleasures involved and the gratification that comes from this intimacy with this lovely woman, whom God designed to be so attractive to the man. But a sin has actually warped that desire. What should be really a matter of love now is perverted and becomes a matter of lust. And we are so completely confused and, you would say, our understanding is so completely twisted by sin that we can actually mistake lust for love. But the two could not be farther apart from each other. Love is not lust, and lust is not love. In fact, they are mutually opposed to each other. Love overcomes lust, and lust will destroy love. It will just destroy it. Love wants to give because it's motivated by a desire for the good of the other and giving of oneself, one's own comfort, one's own satisfaction, and so on, for the good of the other person. Lust takes. It is the nature of lust to want to take from the other, to take something from the other, something good from them, to appropriate it, to devour it. That's what lust is. They're absolutely opposed to one another. And so when a man is thinking about marriage, and it's not just when he's preparing for marriage, it's within marriage too. But I'm saying that before a man gets married, he actually has to prove himself. He has to prove that he's a man. How does a man prove that he is a man capable of being married? Well, he has to prove that he's capable of love. How does he prove that? Well, let's say a man meets a young lady, and he's very smitten by her and attracted to her on all levels, maybe, yes, even spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and so on, physically, certainly. See, he still has to prove himself because he may say that he loves her. He may think that he loves her. But how does he know what that means? Well, he may think he loves her because she is attractive to him. But that attractiveness can really be a matter of lust, that he just desires her. And love is not just a matter of desire. I mean, you can desire a bowl of ice cream, but it doesn't do the ice cream any good. That's not love, clearly. So, how does a young man know that he really is capable of loving her? If he loves her as a person, okay? He loves her not just as an object of desire. He loves her body and soul. Body and soul. He never forgets that. She's a person. He loves her as a person. And she's never less than that. He never just dissects her into a body and a soul, and I want her body, the heck with her soul, or even worse. He doesn't do that. Love doesn't do that. He loves her for the person she is, and he never loses sight of the fact that she's not just a piece of meat. She is a person with a soul. And because he loves her as a person, he's very protective of her. Because his love wants her good, he is protective of her, body and soul. That's what true love is, a young man for a young woman. He will protect her body and soul. He would never do anything to injure her physically, but rather he would even defend her and put himself in harm's way to protect her bodily. The same with her soul, though. He loves her soul no less. And he will protect her soul. He will protect her soul from others. If he sees that she's in danger morally, spiritually, his love is on the job right there, ready to go to work and protect her. And he loves her so much that he will even protect her from himself. He will even protect her from himself because he realizes that he is a predator because of sin. And he's got to be very wary of that. Never to lower himself to that level or lower herself to that level, that he would take advantage of her and sacrifice her for his pleasure. So when a man really loves, this is what he does, and he shows it in the way he courts her, when he's on a date with her, when they're alone, whatever, traveling here or there, or sitting on the couch. He does not allow himself to trespass beyond certain bounds, and that's how he shows his love for her, by his restraint. He shows his love for her not by his indulgence or self-indulgence. He shows his love for her by his restraint. Not only by what he's willing to say to her, but by what he's willing to hold back. He would never let loose a torrent of abuse against her when he's angry, because he loves her. He'll restrain that. By the same token, he will not give free rein to his lust. He restrains that. He restrains that out of love for her. And by doing so, that's how he actually proves that he loves her. If he can't do that, he's not ready to marry her, and she's not ready to marry him, and she should know that too. If he can't restrain that lustful desire, and he won't do it for her, out of respect for her as a person and out of love for her as a person, she has to ask herself, is this man really capable of marrying me and caring for me, body and soul, the rest of my life, the rest of our lives? He can't do it now. He can't restrain himself now and prove himself my protector and someone truly who loves me enough to hold all that back and restrain that. How is he going to do that when he's my husband? He can't do it now. So you see, a young man has to prove his love, not necessarily by going off and slaying the fire-breathing dragon. That was symbolic. What the symbolic nature of that fire-breathing dragon was, it represented his own lustfulness. He had to slay that dragon for her and prove that he was man enough and had enough of manly love in him and a love for her in particular to say that he could be trusted, that he could be trusted with this young lady as a real treasure. So what we have standing against this for a man is a man's version of fantasy. The poison in a man's life that will poison all of his relations, especially with women, that poison is a kind of fantasy which we know as pornography. That's the man's fantasy, pornography. And he gets the idea, but this is what it's really all about. This hot, steamy intimacy. And this is the life that he's going into now as a married man. This perpetual, endless, hot, steamy fantasy of self-indulgence. This is what pornography does. This is what it sets up his expectations in his whole relationship. I recently had a young man tell me how pornography had affected him. And he said, first of all, when he first was online and looking at all this stuff, it made him feel, well, actually inadequate and angry. Why? Because he said he saw what all these other people were doing and posting online and all the things they were enjoying and all the adventures they were having sexually. And he wasn't having any of those, and he felt like he was being left out and he was being denied. And this isn't fair. Why is my life so humdrum and so denied when all of these other people are out there having an orgy? That's what he found online. And he said it created this kind of fantasy in his own mind that he was some kind of victim who was being denied what he had this right to, that everybody else isn't having a great fun with. He said that's one thing that occurred to him. He said, but then when he got through that, he realized what else it was doing to him. It was affecting his expectations and affecting all his relationship with women, because pornography was all about that connection of man and women that is really a disconnect. That is, that women are basically there for pleasure, and they loving them really comes down to a matter of basically just having relations with them. And it has to be, the more exciting, the more disturbing even, the more weird and twisted and the more bizarre, the better, in the sense that it involves more of the passions. This passionate relationship, they said. Now, he said that's what pornography does to man. It puts this false idea and expectation in a man's mind of this passionate, endless orgy of a sexual relationship. And when men go into a marriage with that fantasy created by pornography, they're really dangerous. And it's almost impossible for them. As long as they're indulging in that, as long as they're living that and thinking like that, it's almost impossible for them to ever be happy in marriage. And they ruin everything. And that's what pornography does. It just ruins everything. Why? Because it's lust, and lust is not love. It's the opposite. Lust is all take. All take. Love is give. So, love overcomes lust, but lust will destroy love if you let it do so.